Department A4 is your organization, and the trickiest part of your organization is incorporating what's called the QA function. In this organization, there's the overall environmental director, then there is the air program director who reports to the environmental director, and then in this situation, we've got a site operator, and in a lot of cases, that's it. In fact, it may be just part of your time as a site operator that you can spend on air quality monitoring. And that's where you have to start to get creative and work with other people. So we also have what's called a QA reviewer. And this QA reviewer, supported by a QA contractor, for example, and keep in mind this is just an example, can provide with the instrument support contractor who conducts independent audits with their own equipment, the independent QA function that's needed in order for your data to be legally defensible. And it just makes sense. I don't send anything out that's important unless I have somebody else review it. And it makes a special sense in terms of your data. And even though you may be monitoring for informational purposes and not regulatory monitoring at this point, you want your data to be legally defensible. So you're going to have to involve somebody else. And in this example situation, we have a QA reviewer. And the QA reviewer has to be somebody who understands environmental data to some extent, but we all can learn on the job, and a big comprehensive QAPP like the one you're writing provides all the information along with the SOPs, especially for data management, that an independent QA reviewer would have to know in order to review your data quarterly. It may be that in your situation you have to involve a QA contractor. We will be talking about PQAOs, Primary Quality Assurance Organizations, because you could work with somebody from another tribe and they could provide the independent QA function, and you could review their data every quarter and you could provide their independent QA function as long as it's all documented. So this is an example in a case where there was somebody in the water quality department who understood something about environmental monitoring but had to really learn about what it takes to review the QA data. And that can be done both by on-the-job training, taking ITEP training courses, and working with the site operator to review the data that has to be reviewed every quarter. So the example QAPP element sets forth a system in which the site operator reviews every piece of QC data that they enter into the database. So for example, if they've got a form that they enter in the field, when they get back to the office and enter it into the database, or it's imported into the database, they double check every value. Then it goes every quarter or every month, or however you work it, to the QA reviewer. So the QA reviewer, who reports to the environmental director and not directly to the air program director, can independently assess the quality of the data. And it's really important that this be done and that it be documented. It doesn't have to be fancy. It could be documented in emails, for example. Sometimes you may want to involve a contractor to assist you with your independent QA function. This is really hard, especially for very small organizations. But you need to try to be creative, work with another tribe, work with somebody who can provide the independent QA function. Otherwise, your data are suspect, unfortunately. If you're the only one who's gathered the data, who's reviewed it, who's double-checked it, you don't have anybody else to put their stamp of approval on it and say, yep, I reviewed it too, it looks great, and that's all you need. I want to point out to you two documents that are available from EPA on the AMTIC website. The first is the roles of a QA manager. And keep in mind, just as this document says, this document uses the term QA manager. You may use the term QA reviewer, QA coordinator, but the basic requirements are that the QA person, the QA manager in this example, needs to be organizationally independent of the person gathering the data. That is accomplished when you have a QA reviewer, as helped by a QA contractor, who reports directly to the environmental director. Now, of course, the QA reviewer will work very closely with the site operator, and they'll probably talk quite often, especially during periods of data review. But the idea is that the person who is reviewing the data reports to somebody else, so they can't essentially be fired if they find out that the site operator was faking the data, for example. That never happens, but you just need to be able to prove that it doesn't happen. So this document that describes the roles of the QA manager that's on the EPA website describes the requirements for this independent QA function, that they're organizationally independent, that they have sufficient technical expertise. Now, a water quality person might be great. Data is data, and they understand QC measurements when they're making water quality measurements are function just in the similar sorts of ways as air quality QC measurements do. So they have sufficient technical expertise, they have that independent oversight, and they have access to upper management. So in other words, if they find something, in theory, that's terrible, they could go directly to the environmental director and explain the situation, and then the situation could be fixed as quickly as possible. So this document, The Roles of a QA Manager, describes the responsibilities in terms of also what an ongoing duty would be, and that includes tracking the implementation of corrective actions, developing data quality objectives, making sure that somebody in your program looks out for the transfer standards, so the flow rate transfer standards, the temperature, relative humidity, make sure that they're calibrated within the periods of time, usually a year, that they have to be recalibrated in. And then all important data validation. And I'm going to have a video on data validation itself, but that's basically carefully reviewing the data. Look at anything anomalous, making sure that the hours when maintenance was being done or QC checks were being done are flagged as not valid hourly values, for example. Making sure that any spikes are corroborated or supported by data from a nearby site, by windroses showing that the air was coming in a particular direction, by additional evidence, and that can be very easily done, and most of it can be done online. You don't even need to be on site in order to conduct data validation, but you do have to have good lines of communication. And then importantly, doing QA/QC summaries so that every quarter the reports that go to your management and to EPA include a section on QA/QC, any corrective action and whether it was successful. And in general, working with you in a cooperative way to understand your QC data, to put the final stamp of approval on the validity or the invalidity of the data that you've already judged to be valid or invalid, and provide overall assessments of data quality. And that can be done on a quarterly basis and then on an annual basis as well. So those are the general responsibilities of the QA manager. Another very important document that is also available on the AMTIC website has a very long title, Options Available for Tribes to Meet Independent Performance Evaluation Requirements for the Ambient Air Monitoring Programs Collecting Data for Comparison to the NAAQS. And Mike Papp at OAQPS drafted this options paper that basically describes how tribes could work with other tribes, work with a consortium of tribes, work with a contractor to obtain the independent performance evaluations that are required in order for your data to be able to be compared against the NAAQS and to be used to determine attainment or non-attainment. So this is a great document. It's in your resources folder. It talks about how to accomplish this independence so that you have somebody else coming in and assessing the overall accuracy with their own equipment, looking at the differences between your instrument results and their instrument results. And it provides this diagram showing that whoever this person is, they need to have 2 levels of separation from your management, and it describes specifics for implementation of some of these performance evaluations. If you have an adequately sized program, you could conduct all the audits yourself, one tribal monitoring organization auditing another, cooperation between states and counties and tribes. This may include borrowing federal equipment. So it may be that if you could obtain the equipment and you could obtain somebody qualified from a nearby tribe, they could perform the audits and then you could do the same thing for them, thereby saving a lot of money. But it has to be done very carefully, and so we've got these documents in the resources folder that describe that. It also describes what I think is probably the best option for a lot of different small agencies, not just tribes, but forming a primary quality assurance organization. And these could be formed pollutant specific. So you could decide that you're going to collaborate with a tribe, and it doesn't necessarily have to be nearby. The land does not have to be contiguous to form a PQAO. But say you're going to work with another tribe who uses similar equipment, has similar procedures, operates under a practically identical or preferably identical quality assurance project plan and a quality management plan. And in that case, if you make sure that basically your measurements are going to be consistent between the two of you, then when you make an audit, the results of that audit reflect on the data quality that both of you, for example, at two different sites, are obtaining. So primary quality assurance organizations are a great way to go to save a lot of money in terms of audits. You have to agree to follow very specific and similar procedures, but a lot of people follow the same exact procedures anyway. There's only so many different ways you can operate a BAM 1020, for example. So you're going to probably be doing pretty much the same thing. So if you can prove that your network, and it may be only two sites, for example, are homogeneous, then any audit done on any one of you applies to your whole network. And again, you could be monitoring for ozone and PM 2.5 and decide that in order to save money on the very frequent and expensive PEP audits, you're going to work with a nearby tribe just on PM 2.5. You could have a PQAO just for PM 2.5 with that other tribe and continue to have your own network for your ozone monitoring, for example. So I highly recommend this document, and it is available on the AMTIC website and in your resources folder.